My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, what I'm about to share with you today will change the way you think about something you do every single night. Pope John Paul II, one of the most beloved and spiritually insightful pontiffs in our Church's history, made a revelation that most Catholics have never heard about. And it concerns something so personal, so intimate, that many of us never consider its spiritual implications: sleeping alone. Now, before you think this is just another story, let me ask you something. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night feeling an unexplained heaviness? A sense that something wasn't right? Have you ever felt more spiritually attacked during the quiet hours of darkness than during your busy day? If you're nodding your head right now, you're not alone. And what Pope John Paul II revealed about this will shock you. You see, my friends, our beloved Holy Father understood something that modern society has forgotten. He knew that when we sleep, when our conscious minds rest, we become spiritually vulnerable in ways that most people never consider. And sleeping alone? Well, that creates a spiritual condition that can leave us exposed to influences we never imagined. I know some of you might be thinking, but I've been sleeping alone for years, and I'm fine. But are you really? How many nights have you tossed and turned with unexplained anxiety? How many times have you woken up feeling spiritually drained, even after a full night's rest? How often do you find yourself struggling with thoughts and temptations that seem stronger in the dark hours? Stay with me, because in the next 40 minutes, I'm going to share with you exactly what Pope John Paul II understood about this hidden spiritual danger. I'm going to show you why the early Church had specific practices for nighttime protection that we've forgotten. And most importantly, I'm going to give you the tools our Catholic tradition provides to protect yourself and your loved ones. But first, let me connect with something I know you understand. You remember the deep faith of our parents and grandparents, don't you? The way they would sprinkle holy water in their bedrooms, the way they kept their rosaries close at night, the way they never went to sleep without proper prayer? They knew something we've forgotten in our modern world. They understood that the spiritual battle doesn't stop when we close our eyes. In fact, it often intensifies. Pope John Paul II, in his profound spiritual wisdom, recognized that in our individualistic age, we've lost sight of fundamental spiritual truths about protection and community. When he spoke about the dangers of spiritual isolation, he wasn't just talking about our waking hours. He was addressing something much deeper, much more intimate. Think about this for a moment. In Scripture, we're told that our enemy prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But when does a lion typically hunt? In the darkness. When are we most vulnerable? When we're unconscious, when our spiritual guards are down, when we're separated from the protection of community and conscious prayer. Now, I want you to really listen to what I'm about to tell you, because this could change your life. Pope John Paul II understood that sleeping alone creates what spiritual theologians call a vacuum of protection. When we sleep in spiritual isolation, without the prayers of others, without the blessing of companionship, without the protection that comes from spiritual community, we open ourselves to influences that can affect not just our sleep, but our entire spiritual well-being. You've felt it, haven't you? Maybe you've never connected it before, but you've experienced those nights when sleep becomes a battlefield. When your dreams are troubled, when you wake up feeling like you've been wrestling all night. When morning comes, and instead of feeling refreshed, you feel spiritually exhausted. The early Church understood this so clearly. That's why monasteries were designed with shared dormitories. That's why Catholic families traditionally had children sleep in the same rooms. That's why our ancestors would gather for evening prayers as families, creating a spiritual shield over the entire household before anyone went to sleep. But in our modern world, we've been told that privacy is paramount, that individual space is essential. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with having your own room, Pope John Paul II recognized that we've lost something crucial in the process. We've lost the understanding of spiritual protection through community, even in our most vulnerable moments. Let me share something with you that might surprise you. In the Vatican, even the Pope doesn't sleep in complete spiritual isolation. There are always others nearby, not just for physical security, but for spiritual protection. The Holy Father understood that even he, with all his spiritual authority, benefited from the prayers and presence of others during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Now, I can see some of you thinking, but what if I'm widowed? What if I live alone? What if circumstances require me to sleep by myself? And that's exactly what I want to address, because Pope John Paul II didn't leave us without solutions. He provided us with a roadmap for spiritual protection that goes far beyond physical companionship. The first thing our beloved Pope emphasized was the power of establishing a sacred space. Your bedroom isn't just a room where you sleep. It's a sanctuary where you spend 8 hours every night in complete vulnerability. How you prepare this space spiritually matters more than you might imagine. When Pope John Paul II spoke about creating spiritual protection in our sleeping spaces, he wasn't talking about superstition. He was talking about invoking the real, powerful protection that comes from our Catholic faith. The crucifix above your bed isn't just decoration. The holy water you sprinkle in the corners of your room isn't just tradition. These are spiritual weapons that create a barrier against negative influences. Let me ask you something. Do you currently have a crucifix in your bedroom? Do you have images of Our Lady, perhaps a picture of the Sacred Heart of Jesus? If not, you're missing one of the most fundamental protections our Church provides. These aren't just symbols. They're invitations for divine presence in your most vulnerable space. But Pope John Paul II went deeper than just blessed objects. He understood that spiritual protection requires active participation. That's why he emphasized the importance of nighttime prayer routines that most modern Catholics have abandoned. Think about your grandparents again. Do you remember how they would kneel beside their beds every single night? How they would pray the rosary before sleep? How they would make the sign of the cross and offer their rest to God? They weren't just going through motions. They were creating spiritual armor for the night ahead. The Angelus prayer, traditionally prayed at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening, was designed to mark the day with divine protection. But Pope John Paul II understood that we need that same intentional spiritual protection as we transition into sleep. The night prayer, the Compline, the final devotion before rest, creates what he called a spiritual seal over our consciousness as we sleep. Now, let me share with you one of the most powerful insights Pope John Paul II provided about this topic. He explained that when we sleep in spiritual isolation, we're not just vulnerable to negative influences. We're also missing out on the positive spiritual benefits that come from community protection. You see, when faithful Catholics sleep in the same space, or when families maintain spiritual unity even in separate rooms through shared prayer routines, something beautiful happens. Their guardian angels work together. Their prayers create a network of protection that covers everyone involved. It's like having a spiritual security system that never turns off. But when we sleep in complete spiritual isolation, cut off from this network of prayer and protection, we're relying solely on our own spiritual strength during our weakest moments. And Pope John Paul II understood that even the strongest among us can benefit from the support of others, especially during sleep. This is why he was such a strong advocate for maintaining spiritual community, even in our modern, individualistic world. He knew that the Church isn't just about Sunday Massachusetts. It's about creating bonds of prayer and protection that extend into every aspect of our lives, including the 8 hours we spend unconscious every night. Let me give you a practical example of what this looks like. In traditional Catholic households, before anyone went to sleep, the family would gather for night prayers. They would pray for each other's protection, they would invoke the intercession of the saints, they would ask Our Lady to watch over them through the night. This created a spiritual umbrella over the entire family, protecting everyone even when they were in separate rooms. But what happens when you live alone? What happens when circumstances mean you don't have that built-in spiritual community? This is where Pope John Paul II's wisdom becomes incredibly practical and accessible. First, he emphasized the importance of connecting spiritually with the broader church community, even from your own home. When you pray the rosary before sleep, you're not praying alone. You're joining with millions of Catholics around the world who are offering the same prayers. When you invoke the protection of the saints, you're calling upon a communion that extends far beyond your physical location. Second, Pope John Paul II understood the power of establishing spiritual routines that create consistency and protection. It's not enough to pray occasionally when you feel anxious or threatened. Spiritual protection works best when it's established as a regular practice, creating what he called habitual grace that operates even when we're not consciously aware of it. Let me walk you through what Pope John Paul II recommended as essential elements of nighttime spiritual protection. And I want you to really listen to this, because implementing these practices could transform your sleep and your spiritual life. The first element is consecration of space. Before you ever lie down to sleep, your bedroom should be consciously offered to God. This means blessing the room with holy water, ensuring that sacred images are present and properly positioned, and removing anything that might invite negative spiritual influences. Now, some of you might be thinking about what needs to be removed. Pope John Paul II was very clear about this. Anything in your sleeping space that contradicts Catholic teaching, anything that celebrates worldly values over spiritual ones, anything that could serve as an invitation to influences that oppose God's will for your life, needs to go. The second element is protective prayer. This isn't just a quick "God bless me" before you close your eyes. Pope John Paul II recommended a comprehensive prayer routine that specifically addresses the vulnerabilities of sleep. This includes prayers to your guardian angel, invocation of saint protection, offering your rest to God, and specifically asking for protection against spiritual attack during the night hours. Let me share with you one of the most powerful prayers Pope John Paul II recommended for nighttime protection. It's a prayer that acknowledges our vulnerability while invoking divine strength. Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place myself under your protection during the hours of sleep. Guardian Angel, watch over me and defend me from all spiritual harm. Blessed Mother, cover me with your mantle of protection. May no evil influence disturb my rest or invade my dreams. I offer my sleep to you as prayer, and I ask that you use these hours to strengthen my soul and prepare me to serve you better tomorrow. The third element is spiritual companionship, even in physical solitude. Pope John Paul II understood that we're never truly alone when we maintain conscious connection with the communion of saints. Before sleep, he recommended specifically invoking the presence and protection of saints who resonate with your situation. If you're elderly, call upon Saint Joseph, the patron of a happy death, to watch over you. If you're struggling with health issues, invoke Saint Raphael the Archangel, the healer. If you're dealing with spiritual warfare, call upon Saint Michael the Archangel. If you're a woman living alone, ask for the special protection of Our Lady. These aren't just nice thoughts. They're real spiritual relationships that provide real protection. The fourth element, and this might surprise you, is maintaining spiritual connection with other members of the Church, even during sleep hours. Pope John Paul II encouraged Catholics to establish prayer partnerships, where individuals commit to praying for each other's protection, especially during vulnerable times like sleep. This could be as simple as exchanging phone numbers with fellow parishioners and committing to pray for each other every night. It could mean joining or forming a prayer group where members specifically include nighttime protection in their intercessions for one another. The key is creating spiritual bonds that extend beyond Sunday Mass and into the intimate areas of daily life. Now let me address something that I know some of you are thinking about. What about married couples? Does this mean that being married provides automatic spiritual protection during sleep? Pope John Paul II's answer might surprise you. While there are certainly spiritual benefits to the sacramental bond of marriage, Pope John Paul II understood that even married couples need to be intentional about creating spiritual protection during sleep. It's not enough to simply share a bed. Both spouses need to be actively participating in the spiritual preparation for rest. In fact, some of the most spiritually vulnerable people Pope John Paul II encountered were married individuals whose spouses didn't share their faith commitment. Sleeping next to someone who doesn't provide spiritual support, or who might even resist spiritual practices, can actually increase spiritual vulnerability rather than decrease it. This is why Pope John Paul II emphasized that spiritual protection is ultimately about conscious choice and active participation, not just circumstances. A single person who creates proper spiritual protection can be safer during sleep than a married person who neglects these practices. Let me share with you some of the signs Pope John Paul II identified that indicate you might need stronger spiritual protection during sleep. If you recognize these in your own experience, pay careful attention to what I'm about to tell you. Do you frequently wake up between 3 and 4 a.m. for no apparent reason? This time period, which spiritual theologians call the hour of darkness, is when spiritual attacks most commonly occur. If you're regularly disturbed during these hours, it's often a sign that your spiritual defenses need strengthening. Do you experience recurring nightmares or disturbing dreams that leave you feeling spiritually drained? Pope John Paul II understood that our dreams can become battlegrounds where spiritual forces compete for influence over our subconscious mind. Protective prayer before sleep creates barriers that prevent negative influences from invading our dream life. Do you wake up feeling more tired than when you went to sleep, even after a full night's rest? This spiritual exhaustion often indicates that you're fighting spiritual battles during sleep without proper protection. Your soul is working overtime to defend itself without the backup it needs. Do you find that your prayer life suffers after nights of poor sleep? This creates a dangerous cycle where spiritual vulnerability during sleep weakens your ability to pray effectively during waking hours, which then leaves you even more vulnerable the following night. If you're experiencing any of these signs, don't panic, but do take them seriously. Pope John Paul II taught us that recognizing spiritual vulnerability is the first step toward establishing proper protection. Now, let me give you some very practical steps you can implement starting tonight. These aren't complicated theology. They're simple, powerful practices that any Catholic can incorporate into their daily routine. First, establish a sacred boundary around your sleeping space. This means blessing your bedroom at least once a week with holy water, ensuring that a crucifix is visible from your bed, and keeping a rosary within reach. Some Catholics find it helpful to place a small container of holy water on their nightstand, so they can bless themselves before sleep and immediately upon waking. Second, develop a consistent nighttime prayer routine that specifically addresses sleep vulnerability. This should include prayer to your guardian angel, invocation of saint protection, offering your rest to God, and specifically asking for protection against spiritual disturbance during the night. Third, if you live alone, establish spiritual connections that provide protection even in physical solitude. This could mean calling a fellow Catholic friend every evening for a brief prayer together, joining a prayer chain where members commit to pray for each other during sleep hours, or participating in perpetual adoration where you know other Catholics are praying while you sleep. Fourth, pay attention to what you consume spiritually in the hours before sleep. Pope John Paul II understood that what we watch, read, listen to, and think about before bed creates the spiritual atmosphere for our rest. Fill your mind with prayer, sacred reading, or uplifting spiritual content rather than worldly entertainment that might invite negative influences. Let me tell you about something beautiful that happens when you implement these practices consistently. You'll start to notice that your sleep becomes not just rest, but a form of prayer itself. You'll find that you wake up feeling spiritually refreshed, not just physically rested. Your dreams may become channels of grace rather than sources of disturbance. Many Catholics who follow Pope John Paul II guidance on this topic report experiencing what they describe as visited sleep, rest that feels accompanied by divine presence rather than marked by spiritual isolation. They wake up with solutions to problems they were praying about, with increased peace about difficult situations, with renewed strength for challenges they're facing. This transformation happens because proper spiritual protection during sleep allows God to work in your subconscious mind without interference. When negative influences are blocked out through prayer and sacred practices, divine grace has clear access to minister to your soul during rest. But remember, my dear friends, this isn't magic. It's not about performing rituals for their own sake. Pope John Paul II always emphasized that these practices work because they express and strengthen our relationship with God. They're effective because they demonstrate trust in divine protection and create space for grace to operate. The key is consistency and sincerity. You can't expect to transform your spiritual life overnight by praying one rosary before bed. But if you commit to establishing these practices as regular parts of your routine, you'll begin to experience the protection and peace that Pope John Paul II promised to those who take spiritual warfare seriously. Let me also address something that concerns many Catholics our age. What about assisted living situations? What about nursing homes where you might not have control over your environment? What about hospital stays where privacy is limited? Pope John Paul II understood that life circumstances sometimes prevent us from creating ideal spiritual environments. But he also taught us that the most powerful protection comes from internal spiritual practices that don't depend on external circumstances. Even in a shared hospital room, you can silently pray for protection. Even in assisted living, you can keep a small crucifix or holy card close to your bed. Even when circumstances are beyond your control, you can establish spiritual routines that create protection regardless of your physical environment. In fact, Pope John Paul II suggested that these challenging circumstances can actually strengthen our spiritual protection practices by forcing us to rely more completely on internal grace rather than external support. As we reach the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with a challenge and a promise. The challenge is to take what you've learned seriously enough to implement it in your own life. Don't just listen to this information and forget about it. Choose at least 3 of the practices I've shared and commit to trying them for the next 30 days. Start tonight. Before you go to sleep, bless your bedroom with holy water. Pray specifically for protection during the vulnerable hours ahead. Invoke your guardian angel and the saint. Offer your rest to God as a form of prayer. The promise is this: if you approach these practices with sincere faith and consistent commitment, you will experience a transformation in the quality of your rest and the strength of your spiritual life. You will understand, firsthand, why Pope John Paul II considered this such an important aspect of Catholic living. But I also want to encourage you to share this wisdom with others. How many Catholics in your parish struggle with sleep issues, anxiety, or spiritual disturbance during the night hours? How many have never heard about the spiritual protection our Church provides for these vulnerable times? In the comments below, I want to hear about your experiences. Have you noticed signs of spiritual vulnerability during sleep? Have you tried any of the protective practices I've shared today? What questions do you have about implementing these traditions in your own life? And please, if this message has been helpful to you, share it with other Catholics who might benefit from understanding what Pope John Paul II revealed about this hidden danger. Use that share button, leave a comment, and help spread this important spiritual wisdom to Catholics who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue learning about the profound spiritual insights of Pope John Paul II and other great Catholic teachers. Ring that notification bell so you won't miss future videos that can strengthen your spiritual life and deepen your faith. Remember, my dear brothers and sisters, we're not just individuals trying to get through life on our own. We're members of a spiritual family that extends across time and space. When you implement these practices for nighttime protection, you're not just protecting yourself. You're contributing to the spiritual strength of the entire Church. The same Pope John Paul II who revealed these hidden dangers also gave us the tools to overcome them. He showed us that even in our most vulnerable moments, we're never truly alone when we maintain conscious connection with God and His saints. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember that you have access to spiritual protection that the world doesn't understand. You have guardian angels assigned specifically to you. You have saints who intercede for you. You have Our Lady who covers you with her mantle of protection. You have the Sacred Heart of Jesus that beats with love for your safety and peace. Don't let another night pass in spiritual vulnerability when you have access to all this divine protection. Implement what you've learned. Experience the peace and safety that come from proper spiritual preparation for rest. And discover for yourself why Pope John Paul II considered this knowledge so important that he made sure it was passed down to Catholics like us. May God bless you, may Our Lady protect you, and may you rest tonight and every night under the powerful protection of our Catholic faith. Until we meet again, keep growing in grace and wisdom, and never forget that you are deeply loved by the God who watches over you even while you sleep. God bless you all.